What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brosey. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Dr. Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. I thanks everybody again for listening to Brian and I. Today
Yes.
our topic is going to be about climate change, climate disaster. I guess depending on where you come from, you know, whether you agree with it or not, we want to present the science and possible solutions for that going on. And I think it's a timely topic because right now we seem like we have an incoming president who is going to put climate change on his radar, that administration. So it seems like we're going to focus on that as
Yeah,
opposed to the outgoing president that we have. And
sure.
the other reason why it's timely is that a lot of people don't realize it, but the pandemic that we are currently going through, I wouldn't say directly is due to climate change, but definitely has an indirect impact. And throughout the years, we have seen more and more kind of epidemic pandemics with viruses and stuff coming up. And, I mean, we don't even have to think back too far. What were some of the other viruses? Think about Ebola or the Zika virus. I don't
hmm
know. Remember when that one was just a year or so ago?
Yeah. So what is it about the weather, Keoni, that impacts the viruses to begin with? And then I got a second question for you.
Yeah. Well, what's happening is as the planet warms, one very simple thing is animals are going to move to temperatures that they want to be in, right? So
hmm
you start seeing animals migrating from hotter regions to cooler regions. So you'll start seeing mosquitoes that carry viruses being more and more in the northern hemisphere, moving north. You see tick-borne illnesses moving north. You just see a lot of animal migration. And then the other thing is think about what happens with when you take away the homes of the animals. So we're talking about deforestation, rainforest deforestation, natural habitats being developed, and all of these displace exotic disease carrying creatures in a way that, guess what, favors human contact with them. So this is one of the ways that, or at least the thought goes, but the science says about coronavirus. It was just being coming in close contact with species that we normally aren't in close contact with.
Right.
So that's basically the way it goes, and it's gonna keep happening more and more. So I think we've turned a corner in a negative way, that we are now in a pandemic world of where we're gonna keep getting exposed to these illnesses. So a lot of these tropical illnesses that you see that were in the warmer regions of the world are going to start moving to the cooler regions,
Mm.
like the more temperate regions of the United States or of Europe, and you're going to start seeing these things. So that's basically the main thing. We're talking about other diseases that we know are going to spread too. So malaria, right? Dengue fever, West Nile virus. All these things are spreading into areas where they normally aren't. And you even see this with bug migrations. I mean, I see it here in North Carolina, some invasive species, plant species that are moving into areas that they really shouldn't be in.
hmm Yeah.
So
So overall, it's just because you hear a lot on the news about like, oh, we're heading into the cold and flu season. The coronavirus may or may not get worse because of that. But a large part of what we just talked about is more so the kind of how it impacts like the ecological society, and we all
yeah,
hub more together and thus rub elbows more and also
right,
rub sneezes.
right. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yep. Um, all of it plays a role. So the climate change is closely tied and related to the new diseases that we're going to be seeing, and the
Yeah.
new novel viruses that we're going to see, and like we are with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, before we get too far into it, Keone, I do
yeah,
want to ask you because you're someone who's super cognizant of this type of situation and these problems. And what I just want to know what it was, whether it was in your childhood or some experience that you had that made this, this is definitely an important topic to you. And we've seen that in like recycling, the podcast we did on recycling and that sort of stuff.
Right.
And
Mhm.
I'm not as great as keeping the grand scheme of these sorts of things in the forefront of my mind, whereas you are. So just where did that kind of develop, and how did you become such a, not an activist, but it's always in the forefront
Well,
of your mind, I can tell.
yeah, it is. Well, first of all, both me and you are healthcare providers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like to really get the best healthcare, you have to take care of the planet too. So you not only have to take care of your body, you have to take care of the planet. Also, growing up here in North Carolina, as you did, also, I don't know if you remember any of this, but it's palpable, at least to me, what's going on. I think to other people it is too. I feel like you have to be really, really blind if you don't see what's going on with the weather patterns and stuff like that. So growing up in North Carolina, we used to get, really big, big snows when I was a kid, like
Okay.
1 to 2, 3 or 4 a year,
Yeah.
um,
When
you
I was
just
a kid,
don't.
it was 1 or 2 a year. So there
Yeah,
you go.
yeah,
There's
yeah. And you would get pretty good accumulation. You just don't see that anymore. And you're
yeah.
seeing much, much warmer, you feel much, much warmer winters and things like that. Now, with that being said, it always has been in my mind. I mean, I do have some background. I mean, me and you are not experts on this topic. But what I do, my master's was in engineering, primarily focused on environmental engineering. So that's one case of where I have a very passionate thing with this because, and then the other thing is about the health consequences
Yeah.
of this, and then also I just feel like it's the only planet we have.
Yeah. Can't argue
There's
that.
no planet B,
Hmm.
and I don't think we should. I think we should. What is our guiding metric? We should be looking at the science and looking at what it says. And we say this over and over on our podcast. What does the science say? And science is never complete. It's always going to gather more data and make changes and things like that. But what does it say, and what do we need to do? And that's why I want to talk about this particular topic today.
Yeah.
With that being said, I just want to give a shout out to I'm following two resources. We're following two resources for this talk, and I'm hoping to do like a series of this podcast on it. One is I'm following a resource that you can find online. It's called Human Caused Global Warming and Climate Change: Understanding the Science. It's basically a layperson's approach to understanding climate change. And the person that wrote this, his name is Jack Gibbons of Long Island University. I actually have a very close connection with him. He's my father's, a very good friend of my father. And then the other book that we are following is called Drawdown. And it's the most comprehensive plan to reverse global warming. And it's a New York Times bestseller. This is the book. I don't know if you guys can see that,
Yeah.
but those are the things that I want to follow.
Can you
And
mention the first one again, just since we didn't get to see the title? Like, see it.
it's called Human Caused Global Warming and Climate Change: Understanding the Science, a resource for teachers, students, and policymakers. Basically, in our notes, we can probably put a link to where people can find it online. So we could do that when we actually post it. Anyway, so let's go into what's actually going on. Let's just get a basic understanding as far as we know. So you hear this term called fossil fuels thrown around a lot, right? And what does that actually mean? What are fossil fuels? Well, they're energy sources of oil, coal, and natural gas. Those are the main ones. Basically they formed by prehistoric plant animals when they died. They were gradually buried in the earth over millions of years. Based on the conditions, different types of fossil fuels are formed. And this is what we run the world economy on, is fossil fuels.
Right.
They are not renewable, meaning the supply is finite. So they will run out at some point. And as of right now, we don't have any way or technology to renew them. And based on what's happened with the climate, nor do we really want to do that. We want to switch from a carbon-based, fossil fuel economy to something that is renewable and that does not have the kind of devastating effects that we're seeing from these fossil fuels.
Right.
So the nice thing about them is they have provided us with a comfortable standard of living. I mean, but now we see that it comes at a cost. And when we burn these fuels, when we burn coal, when we burn gas, natural gas, gasoline, anything like that, we basically, what happens is we cause an accumulation of greenhouse gases, and they get put into the atmosphere. And the basic problem with it is when sunlight comes to the earth and passes through and hits the earth's surface, it warms it up. The earth's surface warms up, and then these gases that are in the atmosphere, and they're already there, but we are actually contributing more to it by burning these fossil fuels.
Right.
The earth then heats up.
Yeah.
So what are these greenhouse gases? Well, water vapor is one of them. Carbon dioxide is another one. It seems pretty benign. Carbon dioxide, that's the gas that we breathe out when we utilize oxygen. Mm-hmm. Methane, ozone, nitrous oxide, there's man-made gases, chlorofluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons. But most of these greenhouse gases occur naturally, but the case is being made that humans are contributing more to the concentration in the atmosphere. So the more you put out into the atmosphere, the more that the earth will heat up because the sunlight can't radiate back out into space and stuff like that. It's getting trapped by these gases.
Right.
So that's the basic understanding of it. And we'll go into more detail maybe on later podcasts. And one of the biggest things is that, and it's unfortunate, is we make in our country, at least, we make everything political, right? We make a virus political when the viruses aren't political. They don't care about your politics. They're going to kill you they're going to affect you one way or another or whatever if you don't take precaution. And the same thing with our planet. It doesn't care what your politics are. It's going to happen whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or you support Trump or whatever. It just does not care about that. So it really should not be political, and we really should be on board and follow the science with it. One of the reasons why I'm happy about the incumbent administration, because at the very least, he may be he may not be a great president. We'll have to see. But one thing that I'm thrilled about is he is committed to listening to science. So what is the scientific consensus on this? Well, virtually every organization of scientists in the world concurs with the position that global warming is the result of human activities.
Right.
Okay. I mean, that's every
organization agreed
just
upon.
about.
Pretty scientific law by now.
Pretty much. So here's a letter from December 4th, 2009. It's an open letter to the Congress from U.S. scientists on climate change. And it was actually written because recently a lot of things that made this whole climate change debate political is because there's this whole notion of stolen emails from climate scientists that said otherwise,
Right. Mm-hmm.
But basically it's like in this letter, it's saying observations throughout the world make it clear that climate change is occurring. This is an exact quote. And rigorous scientific research demonstrates that greenhouse gases emitted by human activities are the primary driver. These conclusions are based on multiple independent lines of evidence, and contrary assertions are inconsistent with an objective assessment of the vast body of peer-reviewed science. If we are to avoid the most severe impacts of climate change, emissions of greenhouse gases must be dramatically reduced. Anyway, and then they also go on and just talk about that, part of the thing about science is there's always dissent, and dissent is good, right? So you'll have people saying, what about this? What about that? This doesn't make sense. But, that's what moves the scientific consensus forward. And right now, the consensus is that it is, being driven, at least in part, by human activities. And so that's what we have to stop. And I put this out to people that I've had conversations with, well, that claim they have all this evidence that says otherwise. Usually these are self-appointed experts, social media experts that claim this. But I do say, if you have good evidence, you should be writing it up that said otherwise, because if you get this right, you'll win a Nobel Prize. I mean,
Yeah.
so don't sit here and debate with me on Facebook. I'm not an expert either. I'm going based on the science.
Yeah. What was the publishing body of that paper, Keoni? Or like who
Let's
put it out, or how can people find it for themselves?
let's see. You know what? I think I
Self-published by Keoni Tita.
yeah.
Internet expert.
Actually, a better one would be, it's the American Association for Advancement of Sciences, and there's a
Okay.
better letter. There's actually a better letter out there dated June 28th, 2016. Again, another letter to Congress. This one, this is an exact quote. There's strong evidence that ongoing climate change is having broad negative impacts on society, including the global economy, natural resources, and human health. For the US, climate change impacts greater threats of extreme weather events, sea level rise, increased risk of regional water scarcity, heat waves, wildfires, and the disturbance of biological ecosystems. We just talked about that. The severity of climate change impacts is increasing and is expected to increase substantially in the coming decades. So you could just Google American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, the letters dated June 28, 2016. I think there's also another letter an open letter that was dated December 4th, 2009. So it's an open letter to Congress from U.S. scientists on climate change. I think the latter letter has more signatures on it and more scientific organizations that have signed it and have signed on to it.
Gotcha. But what you're saying is exactly right. I mean, dissent should be within science. That's how we push it forward. That's how we draw, correct, we find truth. So that's
Right.
great. But it appears to be that the overall consensus is we are definitely having an impact here, and to deny it without any sort of proof is definitely damaging to us and our future.
And then the question comes down to, okay, what if we're wrong? What if we're wrong about all this? What if climate change really, and sounds ridiculous for me to say, is a hoax?
Right.
Okay. Then what's the big deal? I mean, I know that sounds like a naive statement and
Yeah.
maybe somewhat cliche, but what's the big deal with using renewable resources? I mean, there's no way we can do this overnight, for one thing. So the change has to be slow, from going from a fossil fuel economy to something that's more renewable, like solar and stuff. And the change is happening, although it's happening very, very slowly.
Sure.
All right. So I am what do you call it? An eclopta optimist, right? So I do think the Earth is heading for disaster, but I'm an optimist that we can kind of head it off at the pass, and we'll be better for it later. I mean, so I think we are making progress.
What a tremendous viewpoint to be able to have, Keoni. You just see the car crash coming, but
Yeah.
maybe something happened.
Right. Anyway, that letter, just so people know, it was signed by the presidents of 31 American scientific organizations. Since 2016, the evidence has become more and more compelling, more and more worrisome. So
Yeah, not to tangent too much here, but this is something we've talked about plenty of times, where we try and continually seek truth by challenging ourselves with like conspiracy type theory. How are you going to get 31 different scientific groups to all conspiracy together for this? And it's just,
yeah, and it's like, and we're talking about 31 American groups, where think about all the other scientific groups throughout the rest of the world. I mean, you're talking,
it's a great point,
thousands that have kind of signed on to this. So where did the dissent come from, right? Well,
sure.
we can kind of guess where it came from, and we're talking about basically corporations, that have a financial stake in what's going on.
Yeah, those are the people that are upset with your what if it wasn't fossil fuel economy.
Right. And what's very interesting is a lot of these corporations, a lot of their own scientists that disagree,
Right.
or it can be traced to politicians who are funded by a lot of these corporations. And I will give the other side some credit, saying that, yeah, there are some outliers, but again, the consensus is overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Okay. And,
Even without a consensus, and I've always kind of said I don't know how the hell you imagine there's whatever 9 billion of us here and we're not at least having an impact. Like at the very least, can we just agree that there's about 9 billion of us and we're possibly, maybe, probably having an impact on the world around us?
Well, what's very interesting now is I think Americans are a very interesting form of Homo sapiens, because we go our own way until it's right in our face, and then we change. And I feel like it's in our face now. I mean, with this pandemic, I feel like it's in our face with the flooding, the hurricanes, the monsoons
fires,
we're seeing, the fires, over and over again. So
yeah, you know what?
I
Now
think,
that you mention it, Keoni, just this weekend we had a hurricane, and hurricane season's over.
Yeah, and I think if you look, the trend is that hurricanes are increasing more and more. So
Yep.
and we'll go into a lot of that science, or kind of like graphs and stuff, and talk about that. But yeah, you're exactly right. This kind of, as far as the corporate world and the fossil fuel industry, like kind of denying this, it's really interesting, because it's the same thing that happened with the cigarette industry, denying that cigarettes are a problem,
Right.
And they knew it was a problem for decades, even before it came to public light about it. And this is the same thing with the fossil fuel industry. So the American fossil fuel industry has known the truth about global warming since at least the 1960s. I mean, August 1966 edition of the Mining Congress Journal, James Garvey, who's a president for bituminous coal research, states there is evidence that the amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere is increasing rapidly as a result of the combustion of fossil fuels. If the future rate of increase continues as it is at the present, it has been predicted that because the CO2 envelope reduces radiation, right? So it traps heat. The temperature of the Earth's atmosphere will increase, and vast changes in climates of the Earth will result. 1966, Rex Tillerson, you remember him? Former CEO of ExxonMobil, former Secretary of State under President Trump, testified.
So we got every reason to be fossil fuel pro.
Right. Testified under oath in a New York courtroom that the company knew for years that global warming was a significant threat. Quote, we knew it was a real issue. We knew it was a serious issue. We knew it was on that's going to be with us for now and forevermore. And it's not something that's just suddenly going to disappear off our concern list, because it's going to be with us for certainly well beyond my lifetime. Rex Tillerson. All right. Getting some truth out of him finally. And then an internal report prepared by ExxonMobil researcher James Black in 1978, a doubling CO2 of concentration of CO2 is estimated to be capable of increasing the average global temperature by 1 to 3 degrees within a 10-degree rise at the poles. Numerous other internal documents from other fossil fuel companies, BP is one. What else? Shell is another one. All of them have internal documents that support this. Yeah. So it's time to like kind of
accept it.
It's to accept it. 1988 internal report by Shell predicted similar effects. Also, CO2 would double even earlier by 2030. CO2 concentrations. So privately, these companies didn't dispute any of this. Publicly, they do. They do. And they find the one or two scientists that they're paying that can publicly go out there and say otherwise, and they create these campaigns that are just crazy but powerful. I mean, right now we're in the midst of a campaign that's saying that Biden did not win the presidential election. I mean, and it's crazy. It's absolute craziness that people are saying that. There's no possible way that I can see that the election results can turn around, but the public campaign is powerful. Mm-hmm. Just like with the cigarettes, absolutely. Just like with this election that we went through, and just like with the whole fossil fuel thing. So let's go back even further, because when did we really start getting an idea of what's going on? I mean, we're talking about the 1800s now. So there, this is very interesting to think about our planet. Based on measurements of solar energy hitting the Earth, um, basically with that and being and the fact that it gets reflected back, our Earth should be about 18 degrees, negative 18 degrees Celsius, or about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So our Earth should be a snowball, okay? But it's not because of these greenhouse gases, the natural ones that kind of trap the heat, and it's not. So that's a good thing to know. And typically the average global temperature without contribution from humans is about 58, 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So they knew back in the 1800s that due to these greenhouse gases that it traps the heat, solar radiation, and helps heat up the planet.
Right.
1859, a guy named John Tyndall found that CO2 and other greenhouse gases absorb infrared light, thus producing a warming effect. So, these gases absorb that solar radiation, the infrared light aspect of it, and thus heat things up a little bit more. So it's nothing new.
Yeah, the actual mechanism is as old as
right. The actual mechanism. As soon as we knew the science, we
Right.
knew what was going on. I mean, you can use this at home too. Think about what you're doing with what do you call those things? A terrarium?
Yeah.
Right.
Like where plants live in a little.
Right. Live in their own little ecosystem. Helps trap heat, helps the plant grow, yada yada yada. By the mid 1900s, the 20th century, we have a really good understanding of the climatic systems of the Earth, right? And if we didn't, we would be completely lost, even more so than we are when the weatherman gets on TV and starts telling us what's going to hit, right? Whether it's going to rain, snow, or whatever. They're not always right, but most of the time they are.
Yeah.
So, so it's kind of like, can we move on and like just accept this? And I think overall, the rest of the world is. I think the United States overall, most of the population knows it to be true. We politicize this, and it's a shame. It's a shame. So anyway, the Earth's temperature is tightly controlled with its climate feedbacks and stuff like that. But what we see as soon as we start putting the human contribution into that, and we've been putting burning fossil fuels since the Industrial Revolution, and now what we're seeing is that global warming is increasing, and we're causing the increase, by at least like a degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees, and that temperature, and it's getting worse and worse. They're estimating that, by the end of 2100, we'll be up to probably increase it if we don't stop, probably 2 to 3, maybe 4 degrees. And 1 degree Celsius doesn't seem like a lot, which is 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's huge when you talk about that over, looking at the whole Earth. That's the average global temperature of the whole Earth.
Right. Yeah, it's like the analogy of you have a ship on a certain path and you change it 1 degree.
Right.
Ride that out 500 more miles. Imagine how different of the location you arrive at.
Right. Exactly. So
Keoni, what are some things I can do? So I got the car that I have. I drive a Volkswagen. I'm going to drive a Volkswagen until the wheels fall off, unfortunately, or a cheaper, better option comes through. I live in a standard American apartment, and I got lights and all that kind of crap. What can I do to kind of help alleviate this situation? I know there's some obvious things like try and drive less and those sorts of things, but what would you add to that?
Oh man. Yeah, it's like trying to get away, it's trying,
because you're in, like you said, we're built on a fossil fuel economy.
We are, and you're kind of like throw your hands up in the air, right? I mean, I'm just one individual out of billions of people on the planet. What kind of impact can I really have with this? And just think about ways of reducing your carbon footprint, from an individual level, and that would be things like, okay, well, there's simple things. I mean, there's simple things like, can I carpool? Can I walk to work? Can I take a bike ride? Do I need to purchase products that have tons of plastic in it? Can we, you know, what we're doing right now, just educating people that it's an issue, you know, being able to talk about it. Being able to talk about it, like what we're trying to do with this podcast, and get you know, with you know, some credence, some, you know, some study of the topic is, I think, the most important thing we can do.
Yeah.
You know, you know, you've heard all the things that we can do. Turn your lights off, get more energy efficient, you know, housing supplies, windows, you know, double pane, you know, things like that. Unfortunately, I think we're at a place where those things will make an impact, at least on an individual level, but more so psychologically for yourself if you want to try to help. I mean, it really comes down to countries like completely switching, completely coming together and switching us out of a fossil fuel economy to kind of put the brakes on it. And again, the brakes, it's not going to stop. It's going to keep going. And then it'll probably, you know, if all goes well, we can see it turn around probably long after our lifetimes, Brian, I would say, based on what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
But it starts with us to help turn it around.
Right. We're slowly running out of time.
I think, you know, I think cars are a big one. You know, if I would love it if we had cars that didn't impact the you know, the fossil fuel consumption in any way, or the waste anyway. I mean, certainly electric cars are a great way to go, but it would be nice if we had cars that, you know, ran completely on hydrogen and nowhere down the pipeline had any impact on the, you know, the consumption of fossil fuels, because a lot of electric cars still do. And there's you know, there's a waste component. What are you going to do with the waste there also?
Sure. Yeah. Which is always a challenge for all these. I was going to ask you too, and if you don't want to share your opinion on these, you don't have to, but are you a supporter of nuclear power, or how do you feel about that as a whole? Because that's where a lot of people, that's where some of that dissent and difficulty making the actual switch comes into play, because you get both scientists on both sides saying this is bad versus this is bad, and we end up just continuing down our path.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on nuclear power, but what I will say this is that it is a much cleaner source of there's a caveat to that.
Until it leaks.
Until it leaks, right. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, and based on the new construction, the very few new construction of like these power plants, my brother, which I hope to have on here at some point, actually works at a nuclear power plant. And and he says they're very, very safe. And he's all pro nuclear energy, at least to help with the transition, right?
Yeah. What's interesting, Keoni, is my grandfather's a nuclear health physicist, played a role in every American power plant, nuclear power plant that's been built. And he has more or less that exact same opinion that you just described your brother having.
Yeah.
So there you go. You know, I guess you could call them biased. They're certainly in the nuclear power plant industry, but there's an inside.
Yeah, there's a bias. Yeah, there's a bias there, but they're definitely more experts than me and you. And
exactly.
And I've read things on it to where, you know, I think we have to really, you know, use that as a way to transition off of fossil fuels. So I agree with it. You know, the disasters that have happened, though, they're problematic. I mean, they're going to be with us for
forever, probably.
Yeah, for thousands of years. You know, you think about Chernobyl, Fukushima, you know, those types of things. I mean, and you know, you know, Mother Nature will, you know, she can bring a lot of devastation to areas, and if you don't have all these
to kind of check some
safety measures in place, safety measures in place, it can be a real issue. And then the other thing is figuring out a way, although I think we are figuring out a way of how to deal with the nuclear waste, stuff like that. So that's the other issue. But I do think that it is important to use.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another kind of political question for you. And again, you don't have to answer, but I am interested in your opinion. And this one's unfortunately gotten a little political, so we'll just go with it. As far as how do we drive this change as a people? This is where me as I'm a libertarian, so I'm constantly hands off, and then that the people should kind of drive it. I want no government involvement in anything. But then I got a lot of great education times where that doesn't work. Like, for instance, the coronavirus, where it's like the government kind of has to step in
Yeah.
and shut things down, or else even me as a business owner has
Yeah.
to stay open to maintain my lifestyle. And that's
Right.
where the government does kind of step in, overstep what I believe is the boundary, but I believe it's a good thing.
Right.
Similar fashion, how do you feel about things like, just as an example, like in Seattle or in Washington, where you have to pay like whatever it is, 20 cents for a plastic bag? Little measures like that to drive these changes. Do you feel like those are positive ways to drive these changes? Do you agree with that? Do you see a better option? Just your general opinion.
Yeah, well, I think a great option is to, especially with Westerners, especially Americans, is to nudge them into doing the right thing, right?
Financially
Yeah.
is how we get our nudging, unfortunately.
Well, financially is one way. There are certainly other ways to nudge them to do it. For example, if you design and make a really cool car that is better and faster and safer, that's clean, people are going to tend to buy that car, especially if you
Right.
can make it cheaply.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that comes down to finances, um or if it becomes part of the public conscious, like,
Right.
one of the reasons why I wear a mask during this pandemic is because I don't want to get anybody sick. I don't know all the ins and outs of the science. I mean, we did a podcast on it. It certainly seems to say that masks work.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly not a long-term solution by any means.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can help uh, fellow people in a way that's not going to infringe on, I don't know, my way of life too much, then I would do that.
Sure.
It's not an issue. So I just feel like if people really thought about what's actually going on in society and really educate themselves on this, I feel like that's probably the best way. There needs to be a more positive marketing campaign on this whole global warming thing, and it needs to be depoliticized. I mean, it just needs to be.
Yeah.
You know,
Good luck.
uh,
Yeah.
right. And we need to talk about how and in that education, we need to talk about, like, how does it benefit us, you as an individual, doing this, making some of these changes as an
Mm-hmm.
individual. And then, well, shoot, doesn't it feel good to help others?
Mm-hmm.
At least,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, there's some nudging that needs to be done in a way where people don't feel like they're being, I don't know, forced into it by some, authoritarian
Right.
scientist
Yeah.
somewhere.
Some big brother hand.
Yeah, right. And again, it starts with, okay, is there a problem? Um, yes, there's a problem.
I
What
just don't
can
know if we have enough people admitting we have the problem, which is what we've been discussing. But yeah.
and that's where the government can step in, and the government can step in by helping nudge people in the right direction, right? So things like where governments take control and basically start, I don't know, at least governmental money towards research for this, or helping entrepreneurs start green renewable companies, things like that. Those are things that certainly can help.
Okay. Yeah. So then the difference I would say between that and kind of the bag question that I was kind of alluding to is the one you bring up is more so nudging progress forward, where the other one is kind of forcing you to take a specific action, or you have to go this route. So I
Yeah,
definitely obviously support that.
to do the right thing. I think it's going to have to be a combination of both. I mean, here's the unfortunate thing. I mean, we're headed for disaster.
Yeah, we
People
definitely
could already
are.
make that case. So it's like, okay, what do you do to get people to change?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think people have to really believe that we are headed for disaster. I don't think we ought to be running around with our heads cut off and like panicking and anything like that. But we need to come together. I mean, wouldn't it be nice is if we came together like we did in World War II, where every American saw that there was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody came
Mm-hmm.
together and Look what
We
happened.
thought for a second the beginning of coronavirus would bring that. We thought for a second.
Yeah, yeah,
We were wrong.
yeah. I mean, so it's almost like it has to be at your doorstep, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's why I'm just interested in thinking about,
Yeah.
and just as a with my own biases and all those types of things, and I got a great look at that with coronavirus, is just whose job really is that, and then what type of job do I want the government to, or what type of role do I want them to play in that? And it's like, we certainly see that we're heading off a cliff, but then it's definitely not our way. And we've talked about almost the American way a lot here. It's
Yeah.
just to, yeah, who drives the change? And at the end of the day, it's got to be us, but we're going to do it so slowly as individuals, whereas the government could enact something that's much quicker. But then I don't know if I agree with it. I was just interested on hearing.
Right. Well, I mean, we talk about it a lot. I mean, people really need to know the difference between facts and opinions and be aware of their biases and stuff like
Which
that.
is becoming even more muddied.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the whole goal is to be what is the truth, and really we can get philosophical about it. I mean, we'll never know complete truth of anything if you really want to get truly philosophical about it.
Mm-hmm.
But do we have something, a non-biased metric science that can help steer us in the right direction? And yes, we do. And I feel like that's where we should put most of our, weight of, to help us make the right decisions,
Yeah.
So
when do we leave the planet, Keoni? When do we exit this and leave it burning and on our way onto a perfect planet?
Unfortunately, that unless there's some significant scientific breakthrough, which there may be, we're stuck on this planet for many, many, many generations. I mean,
Right.
Me and you are born on this planet. We're gonna die on this planet. So we're stuck here.
Yeah.
I mean, like we said at the beginning, there's no planet B. We can't planet hop anymore. And honestly, if you want to see a planet devastated by, natural climate change, go to Mars.
Right.
I mean, it's not a place you want to live.
Yeah.
It's just not a place you want to be. Even with all our technology, you just don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we can, they talk about inhabiting that planet, but so this is it. We have to do something about it until we have a significant change in technology and physics brings us something new where we can find that we can go to other star systems and stuff like that. And I do think we will do that one day, but that's like way, way, way off.
Okay.
Before we
won't be on the ride.
Yeah, before we end, I just want people to know, and I think some of this is tangible for some people. So it is for me, and I think it is for you too, Brian. But with temperatures continuing to rise, and we can talk about different graphs and things like that you can actually go online. You can find these things. But with temperatures starting to rise, what we're going to start seeing, well, we already are, is heat waves are going to be more common. Year after year, temperatures are going to be record setting. We're seeing that year after year. 2016 was the hottest year ever recorded. Then 2017 beat it. Then 2018.
Can I interject with the common other side talking point is that Keoni, the winter is more cold than it was a year ago too.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So if that's a talking point, again, we're talking about global temperature rise. We're not talking about isolated pockets. So you're going to see fluctuations, but you want to look at the total global temperature rise of things and what that does. And what that total global temperature rise shows is that heat waves are more common. Droughts are going to be more common, right? Droughts, higher global temperatures cause an increase in evaporation. Increase in evaporation combined with excessive temperature and more frequent intense heat waves have resulted in severe droughts in drought-prone areas. So other people say, well, shoot, I'm not in a drought. It rains here like a monsoon. Well, you're going to start seeing that too. Right. I was telling somebody here in North Carolina and Winston-Salem, we rarely get light rains anymore. It comes down like tropical rainstorms now, a lot of times when it rains here. And we do have increased flooding. Wildfires. What did we see this past year? Right.
It was, speaking of that, Keoni, being in the southeast, it feels so lush, humid. We get that tropical weather on occasion. I feel like I don't see it as much in my face as I would in other places. We flew to California for a job interview in June, and that was one of the first times I was in the Central Valley of California, which is like the Dust Bowl, is also
Right.
what they call it, in that Modesto, California area. And holy hell, that was the first time I realized, like, if I was smoking a cigarette and dropped it, this land is just going to poof into flames. And
Mm-hmm.
this thing is, I mean, it was as dry as all get out. And then
Right.
there, the guy showing me about the job and whatnot, we're talking about LA demanding all the water from the Central Valley and how this is a huge political debate and problem where they're taking all the water from the farmland to feed the big city and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, that was the first time I felt in my life, just experiencing only the Southeast, to be
Yeah.
like, holy hell, this is a legitimate problem that they are legitimately dealing with now and having to fight over water. And
Yeah.
like I said, you could drop a match and the match could not even be lit. It could just be previously lit, and that the
Yeah.
field is aflame. I mean, it was
Yeah.
so dry. It was nuts just to
and
see from
and
being
and
the
you have
Southeast.
millions of people that
Yeah.
you're going to have accidents like that, and they're going to be
Right.
more and more frequent based on what's going on. One of the things we've heard also about this, so we talked about flooding, we talked about heavy precipitation events, monsoon rain events, sea ice melting, right? Well,
Yes.
the sea ice melting, that's a problem because of what's called the ice albedo effect, right? Sea ice reflects virtually all sunlight back out into space. And without it, the oceans absorb more sunlight and then heat up faster, right? So now you're talking about contributing to typhoons, hurricanes, things like that. Then you have glacial melting, right? Now, this does contribute to sea level rise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is accelerating. There's no doubt about it. And when that happens, you're talking about fresh water supplies being lost for many communities that feed off of those, get their water from these glacial events. Plus, you're talking about all these cities, many, many cities all over the world who are on the coast that are going to be flooded by it. And this, I don't think this would ever happen. I'm almost certain this would never happen. But if all the glaciers melted throughout the world, we're talking about a sea level rise of like almost 200 feet.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
almost like, okay, I'm gonna where I live in Winston-Salem, which is like 900 feet above sea level, I'm just gonna have to drive a short distance to get to the coast then,
Mm-hmm.
instead of driving my 4 hours.
Yep.
The polar ice caps melting, they contribute to that.
The first year I moved here, Keoni, Hurricane Irma came through.
Yeah.
Downtown Jacksonville shut down, completely flooded. You're looking at like downtown streets, where everything's happening, and it's 6, 8, 10 feet of water
Right.
on the sidewalk. I
And
mean,
that's gonna be more and more common, especially in our area of the country, right? Because we tend to
right.
be in the humid area. We tend to get big rainfall events now. We get the hurricanes like hitting us constantly. Definitely you in Florida, and we get the tail ends of it here in North Carolina.
And then them happen, and it's one thing for them to happen, and then it takes 2, 3, 4 years of recovery. And then as they pick up steam and continue to happen more and more, you get more of that beach erosion, and it becomes
Right.
more of a constant.
Oh
And
yeah.
it compounds the sea level rise. It compounds all these factors just by the simple fact that it's been happening more and more, and we haven't had the time to recover that we typically have had.
Right. And think about the economic consequences of that.
But
you
right,
know
yeah,
I mean, so it's like, what really, this whole politicization of it, what's going to be more cost effective?
yeah. Why are we arguing?
Right. Why are we arguing? The other things that happen, because we've all heard them, right? With global warming, you have acidification, ocean acidification.
Mm-hmm.
Species extinction is through the roof right now.
Yeah, we've all seen the what is
Yeah.
it, polar bear type clips where
Yeah.
they're like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Desertification, right, where you get in areas that are already deserts, the desert starts growing. In areas that are wet, they become wetter.
mm-hmm.
The tropical climate zones basically expand poleward, so basically you're getting species like mosquitoes that travel as the climate zones increase, and then you get more disease. What am I missing? Anything? What else?
Oh, I mean that.
I guess that's enough. But those things I feel like are in our face. I mean,
Right.
some people would debate that, but I think if you talk to anybody the average person who's been on the planet for at least a few decades would be like, yeah, things do seem like they're changing. Certainly temperatures seem like they're changing, and climate seems like they're changing.
Yeah. Bottom line consensus is the scientists are pointing towards this being something we are definitely impacting and can definitely impact.
Right.
How quickly.
Right. So getting back to your question, on an individual level, what can we do? I mean, that's something that's easily Googled, but I don't think it's going to make a huge impact. It's really, at this point, it's governments that have to come, and I do what I can. It's like insulate your house for one thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
Don't run the electric all the time. Things like that. Fuel efficient cars may help a little bit, but really those are very, very small things that
we got to do them as a whole for it to make an impact.
But on one of our next podcasts, we'll talk about like some of the neat innovative stuff that people are doing to try to help combat this whole global
all right, so Pick
thing.
Me Up is around the corner.
Yeah, sorry for another depressing podcast, everybody. But anyway, so anybody out there that wants to give their point of view on this, we'd be happy to have you on, especially if you want to give an opposing point of view and can back it up.
Yeah, all right. If not, just spew your nonsense on Facebook and we'll read it there as well. Have a great day. We'll talk with you next week. Keoni, anything else?
Nope, that's it. Take
all right,
care,
everybody be well.